The damp late afternoon breeze, carrying the unmistakable scent of wet earth and wildflowers, freshly awakened by the fine rain, barely reached Arthur in his isolated mansion in rural Minas Gerais. He was a man of immense wealth, an empire built with steel and determination, yet he found himself shackled by an invisible pain, heavier than any iron chain. His old wound, an abyss that never healed, was the blindness of his son Leo, a 10-year-old boy whose vision had faded after a silly accident in the garden, a fall that led to irreparable damage, or so the doctors said. Arthur, a widower for 5 years, lived for Leo's cure, an explicit desire that consumed every fiber of his being. But his deeper longing was for connection, a human bond that had vanished with the loss of his wife and further fragmented with his son's tragedy. He who had always controlled everything, from the stock market to the smallest details of his home, now found himself powerless before the darkness that enveloped his son. There was a silent flaw in him, a distrust of any kindness that could not be bought, a pride that isolated him and prevented him from seeing that sometimes the solution was not in exorbitant figures, but in the simplest things, in small gestures. The mansion, with its wild gardens and damp lawns stretching to the woods, was a sanctuary of luxury and despair. Arthur had brought the world's greatest specialists, spent fortunes on experimental treatments, but the truth always returned, cold and sharp. There was no hope. Despair, like a silent antagonist, consumed him, making him doubt everything that wasn't tangible, measurable. He feared fragility, the loss of control, and so his methods were always of imposition, of relentless pursuit, which paradoxically threatened the emotional connection with his own son, who felt the pressure of paternal expectation. One day, driving his creaking car through the winding streets of a nearby village, Arthur was approached by a homeless man, a man who seemed to have time etched onto his skin, with eyes that carried stories of a million paths. He approached Arthur's car, not asking for alms, without a gesture of plea, just with a quietness that intrigued him. Arthur, accustomed to looking away, felt compelled to wait. Who was this man, after all, who didn't behave like the others? Before knowing what would happen next, I'd like to ask you, our viewer, to write your name and the city you're watching this story from. It's a pleasure to have you here with us. The homeless man, with a hoarse but surprisingly clear voice, told Arthur he knew of his suffering. He spoke of Leo, of his blindness, of the pain weighing on the father's soul. Arthur felt a shiver. How could this stranger know such intimate details of his life? The mansion was isolated, his pain a secret kept under lock and key. Arthur's distrust ignited, mixed with a pang of curiosity. The man extended his hand, offering Arthur a small smooth stone, a light grey color with almost imperceptible veins that seemed to draw an ancient map. It was a common stone, like those found in riverbeds, but the way the homeless man held it, with reverence, gave it a different glow. He said, "Give this stone to your son, Arthur. He will see again." Arthur looked at the stone, then at the man. His first impulse was to laugh, a bitter laugh. Another farce, another empty promise, like so many he had heard and paid dearly for. He who had spent millions on cutting-edge clinics, on experimental surgeries, on treatments with the greatest names in world medicine, now received a stone from a homeless man with the promise of a miracle. It was an insult to his intelligence, his fortune, his pain, but there was something in those eyes, in the man's calm, that made him hesitate. A sincerity that couldn't be bought, a certainty that couldn't be faked. Arthur took the stone. It was cold to the touch, but it seemed to carry an invisible weight. He didn't know what to think, what to feel. His pride screamed at him to throw that nonsense out the window, but the small flame of hope, the one he had tried to suffocate for years, stubbornly continued to glow. What would he lose by trying? He thanked the man, almost as a reflex, and went on his way, the stone clutched in his hand. At the wheel, Arthur's mind was buzzing. It was madness, he knew. Complete and absolute madness. But the image of Leo, trapped in darkness, was a constant torment. What if there was a chance, even a minimal one? That thought frightened and propelled him at the same time. It was a risk he didn't want to take, but deep down he knew he had to. Arriving home, Arthur hid the stone in his jacket pocket. He didn't want anyone to see it, much less Leo. The shame of believing in something so absurd was almost palpable. He went up the stairs to his son's room. his heart heavy. Leo was sitting on the bed listening to an audiobook with that gentle smile that always broke Arthur's heart. How could he present that stone to Leo after all the unfulfilled promises, all the disappointments? Guilt was a heavy burden. Arthur put the stone in a small wooden box inside his most secret drawer. He looked at it for a long time, the small grey rock seeming to glow under the faint light. There was nothing special about it, nothing that could justify the faith the homeless man had placed in his words. But why then couldn't he simply discard it? The question hung in the air, unanswered. What would make a man as skeptical as Arthur keep such an improbable object? Arthur's internal struggle was a battlefield. On one side, the sharp logic of a businessman who only believed in facts and figures, who saw the stone as cheap charlatanism. On the other, the whispering voice of a desperate father, clinging to any thread of hope, however thin. He found himself looking at the secret drawer, imagining what he would do. Giving that stone to Leo would be admitting a weakness, a surrender to the irrational. But not giving it, not trying, would be an even greater cowardice, an abandonment of the last spark of faith he still held. The following days were a silent torment. Arthur tried to maintain his routine, manage his businesses, but his mind always returned to the small wooden box. Leo, meanwhile, seemed more sensitive than usual. He asked his father about the sounds of the garden, about the colors he imagined existing beyond his darkness. "Dad, what color is the sky today?" he would ask, and Arthur would feel a pang in his chest, impotence corroding his soul. Every question from Leo was a thorn, reminding him of the unfulfilled promise of the miracle that didn't come. Arthur knew he couldn't postpone it any longer. That object, the light grey stone that seemed so insignificant, had become an unbearable weight. He took a deep breath, opened the drawer and picked up the stone. It felt heavier now, carrying not the power of a miracle, but the weight of his own indecision. It was a gamble, a final play against despair, and he would do it for Leo. But how? How to explain to his son that his father, the man who always sought science, now brought a rock from a stranger? That night, Arthur went to Leo's room. The boy was lying down, a braille book on his chest, his fingers gliding over the words that formed worlds in his mind. Arthur sat on the edge of the bed, the stone hidden in his palm. "Leo," he began, his voice a little choked, "Daddy found something very special today. A wise man gave it to me, and he said it has a power to help us see what is beyond what the eyes show." He struggled to remain calm, not to let his own disbelief show. Leo, noticing the seriousness in his father's voice, extended his hand. Arthur placed the stone in his palm. The boy touched it with his fingertips, exploring its smooth surface, the veins that seemed to whisper ancient secrets. He squeezed it lightly, then brought it to his chest, as if wanting to feel its essence. "That's beautiful, Daddy," Leo said with the innocence only a child could possess. "What does it do?" Arthur swallowed hard. "The man said that if you keep it with faith and truly believe, it can help you see again. It's not magic, Leo. It's a way to open the eyes of the heart, perhaps." He felt like an imposter, a charlatan, but the image of the homeless man, with his enigmatic calm, prevented him from giving up. What else could he do? Leo put the stone under his pillow. In the days that followed, nothing changed. Leo's darkness remained the same, dense and relentless. Arthur watched his son, looking for any sign, any different blink, but there was nothing. The stone, the simple grey object, seemed to have failed. Arthur's frustration grew, turning into anger. Anger at the homeless man, anger at himself for having believed in it, anger at life for being so cruel. He felt foolish. He had allowed a glimmer of hope to make him act against all his reason. Where was the promised power? Where was the change? The stone, which once represented a possibility, was now just a bitter reminder of his vulnerability. It was the first tangible proof of his faith, and it seemed to have failed. But was faith just a matter of waiting for an immediate miracle? Or was there something more he wasn't seeing? The pressure of having made that decision began to suffocate him. Arthur closed himself off even more, avoiding the glances of his employees who noticed his growing tension. He couldn't concentrate on business, on meetings, his thoughts always returning to Leo and that useless stone. The idea that he had been deceived by a stranger hurt him. But what hurt him most was the possibility of having misled his son, even for an instant. He needed answers. That story couldn't end with a meaningless object and broken hope. Arthur decided he would return to the village, look for the homeless man. He needed to confront him, understand what was behind that promise. Was he a fraud? Or was there a hidden truth, a secret that Arthur, in his cold logic, couldn't decipher? And you? Have you ever found yourself in a situation where reason and faith clash? Where what is tangible seems insufficient to explain life? Tell us what your Sark's emotional stone was. We believe that sharing is the first step to seeing together. The village was small, with cobblestone streets and simple houses, very different from the isolated luxury of his mansion. Arthur stopped the car at the same spot where he had met the man. He got out, smelling fresh bread and coffee coming from a nearby bakery. He looked around, searching for the face marked by time, the eyes that held so many stories. But the man wasn't there. He asked some residents, described the stranger, but no one seemed to know him. No one remembered a homeless man with those characteristics. That only increased Arthur's confusion. How could a man disappear like that, without a trace? That search, which should have brought clarity, only added another layer of mystery to the whole situation. A feeling of emptiness enveloped Arthur upon returning to the mansion. The search for the homeless man had been in vain, leaving him with a bitter sense of defeat and a deep questioning of his own sanity. Had he made it all up? That encounter, those words, the stone. Could it all be the fruit of a desperate desire, of a mind exhausted by pain? The mansion, once a refuge, now seemed to amplify his isolation, his doubts. He tried to resume his routine, to immerse himself in business. But the image of the homeless man with his wise eyes and unbelievable promise stubbornly kept returning. The grey stone which lay untouched under Leo's pillow was a constant reminder of his vulnerability, of how hope can lead us down irrational paths. Arthur felt the weight of ridicule. He, a man of power and control, had allowed himself to be swayed by a superstition, by a grown-up fairy tale. The guilt of having exposed Leo to another false hope gnawed at him. He could barely look at his son without feeling a lump in his throat. The days dragged on, heavy and monotonous. Leo continued to explore the world through sounds and touch, his blindness an unbreakable barrier. The silent stone performed no apparent miracle. Frustrated, Arthur even thought of throwing it away, of erasing that episode from his memory forever. But something stopped him, a latent curiosity, a small voice that whispered that perhaps, just perhaps, there was something more. Not in the magic of the stone, but in the story behind the man who gave it. Who was he, after all? And how did he know so much about Arthur's life and Leo's pain? One day, weeks after the encounter, Arthur decided to revisit the village, not to look for the man, but to try to understand the context of that place. He walked through the streets, observing the details, the shops, the people. Near an old church, he noticed a community bulletin board, already quite worn by time, flyers of past events, local service announcements. Among them, a yellowed and almost illegible paper caught his eye. It was an invitation to a charity dinner from many years ago, organized by a small institution supporting visually impaired children in the region. In the bottom corner, a small blurred black and white photo, and there, with a younger smile and less grey hair, but unmistakable, was the face of the homeless man. He wasn't homeless at that time. He looked like a dedicated volunteer. The caption below the photo read, "Jose, the Guardian of Light." Arthur felt a shock. Jose, Guardian of Light? What did that mean? The paper in his hands, that fragment of the past, was a piece that didn't fit into what he thought he knew. That man was not a simple wanderer, nor a charlatan. He had a history, an involvement with the cause Arthur sought so desperately. The black and white photo, dated almost 15 years prior, showed a vibrant Jose surrounded by smiling children. This was a pattern disruption in his skeptical mind. The man he had met was only a shadow of what he seemed to have been. He kept the flyer, his mind racing. The misdirection had been perfect. Arthur had focused on the stone and the man's disappearance without considering that the truth might lie in his past, in his purpose. The emotional cost of his distrust weighed heavily. He had judged, scorned, and now found himself facing a clue that unveiled a deeper layer of that mystery. What else was he not seeing in his haste to discard what he didn't understand? That discovery didn't cure Leo, but it ignited a new flame of hope in Arthur, a more grounded, less irrational hope. What would Jose, the guardian of light, have done in that institution? What was his real connection to blind children? And more importantly, why had he become homeless? The feeling that a crucial piece, perhaps the most important, was missing was palpable. He needed to dig deeper. The truth, he realized, rarely revealed itself all at once, but in fragments like the veins of the stone that Leo kept. Arthur returned home, the crumpled flyer in his pocket. He needed more information about that institution, about Jose. That small piece of paper opened a new door, but it also brought a new layer of uncertainty. Who was the homeless man really? And why had he given the stone? The story, which seemed to be ending, had just gained a new and unexpected chapter. Arthur returned home, the crumpled flyer in his pocket, but his mind wouldn't stop. That small image, that name, Jose, the guardian of light, resonated in his head. The man he thought was a fraud, a mere homeless person, had a past, a connection to what Arthur sought most, the cure for his son's blindness. What did that title mean? And why would someone so involved in such a noble cause end up on the streets of a distant village? The questions multiplied, each more urgent than the last. He didn't wait. The next morning he used his contacts. A man like Arthur, with an empire of steel, had access to information most people only dreamed of. He contacted a trusted lawyer, an expert in public records and the histories of philanthropic institutions. The task was clear. Uncover everything about the Institution of Light, the name he deduced from the flyer, and about Jose. Anxiety gnawed at Arthur, but now it was a different kind of anxiety, tinged with an almost feverish hope. He felt he was on the trail of something big, something that could change everything. The first results came in a few days. The lawyer, with his team, scoured old files and databases. They found records of the Institution of Light, founded almost 20 years prior. A small but respected initiative dedicated to supporting and rehabilitating visually impaired children. And yes, Jose was there, not just as a volunteer, but as one of the founders and main visionary. An official document, a founding report, detailed his passion, his tireless dedication, his vision of a world where no blind child felt alone. His full name was Jose da Silva, and he was a former special education teacher, known for innovative methods and rare empathy. That was the second piece of evidence, a verifiable record that Arthur held in his hands. A man with such a big heart, such a brilliant mind, a respected educator. How had he become the homeless man Arthur knew? The contradiction was stark, a chasm between past and present. What could have happened to change the life of such a man so much? The report also indicated a period of great success for the institution, followed by an abrupt financial crisis, culminating in its closure about 5 years earlier. There were no details about the exact reason for the crisis, only a mention of administrative problems and lack of resources. That was strange. Such a successful institution, with such a dedicated founder, wouldn't disappear from the map without a deeper reason. There was a gap, a piece still missing for the puzzle to make sense. Arthur felt a chill down his spine. Jose's story was not that of a charlatan, but of a man who perhaps had lost everything, including his own identity. And why would he have kept the stone, the symbol of hope, even after his own life crumbled? The connection between the stone, Leo's blindness, and Jose's mysterious past became stronger yet still undecipherable. He found himself immersed in a quest that went beyond his son's cure. It was a quest for the truth of a man, for the reason a life had been turned upside down. Jose's eyes, with their enigmatic calm, returned to his mind. What was he trying to say with that stone? Leo, meanwhile, continued in his world of sounds and textures. Arthur watched his son, his heart heavy, feeling increasingly distant. His obsession with Jose and the stone pushed him away, even though his intention was the purest. He promised himself he would find the answers, not just for Leo, but to understand the complexity of the human condition, of faith, and of what truly mattered. But the search for Jose and the institution's past began to attract unwanted attention. Arthur's lawyer, however discreet, stirred up dust in forgotten archives. Some former employees of the institution, contacted in an attempt to fill the gaps, were reluctant to speak. There was a silence, a barrier of fear or loyalty that prevented access to the complete truth. Arthur's emotional cost rose. He felt the pressure of a story that didn't want to be told, of secrets that might have been buried for a long time. What is the price of truth when it hides in the shadows of the past and involves the lives of people who have already suffered so much? Arthur didn't give up. He knew the key to understanding the stone, and José's promise lay in those secrets. The third piece of evidence would come from an unexpected source. An old accounting record of the institution, obtained with great difficulty, revealed an unusual transaction shortly before its closure. A considerable sum of money was transferred to an unknown account under the justification of emergency expenses. The document was incomplete, but the beneficiary's name, though blurred, appeared to be that of one of the directors at the time. This wasn't just administrative problems, it was something much darker. A sense of injustice began to bubble within Arthur. He realized that José's story was not just about a stone and a miracle, but about truth, betrayal, and the pursuit of justice. The missing piece began to take on disturbing contours. The financial director, confronted with the transaction record and the accountant's testimony, could not deny the embezzlement. Justice acted, exposing the fraud that destroyed the institution of light and José's life. Arthur felt a mix of relief and outrage. The stone, which once seemed like a deception, proved to be a catalyst for truth. José was found, weakened, but with his dignity intact. That reunion was a milestone. Arthur, now understanding José's sacrifice, promised to restore not only the man's reputation, but also the institution he loved so much. True vision, Arthur realized, was not in a rock, but in moral clarity and the relentless pursuit of what is right. If this story touches on something you've experienced, on the feeling that truth is more complex than it seems, subscribe now and comment on what you would do in Arthur's place. Your support drives these stories of justice and overcoming. From that day on, Arthur transformed pain into action. With his support, José regained his honor, and the institution of light reopened, strong and transparent, under new direction. And Leo? With his father more present, more at ease, the pressure on the boy decreased. Days later, a simple flash of light in the room made Leo blink. The darkness began to dissipate. His vision didn't return all at once like a magical miracle, but as a slow, gradual process, fueled by renewed hope and the deep connection that re-established itself between father and son. The stone, which was once an object of blind faith, became the symbol of faith in truth, justice, and love, which after all were the true miracles. The connection which Arthur had so longed for finally materialized, showing that the deepest answers often reside in the simplest gestures and the courage to see beyond what the eyes show. If this story resonated with you, if it made you see the power of truth and compassion, subscribe to the channel now, leave your comment and your like. Tell us where you're watching from so I can recognize you in the next chapters. Thank you for staying until the end and supporting our channel. From that day on, Arthur transformed pain and guilt into purpose. With each brick of the institution of light being rebuilt, with José's smile regaining its sparkle, Arthur felt he was finally settling scores with destiny. José, once an invisible man on the streets, was now the soul of the reborn institution, a beacon of hope, radiating empathy and wisdom. He was no longer the guardian of light in name only, but in essence guiding children and parents with the same kindness he had offered Arthur that day on the road. The institution flourished, a legacy restored by truth and justice, a true center of care and development for all. And Leo, the boy once trapped by his father's expectations, found a new kind of freedom. With Arthur more present, more at ease, and less obsessed with an instant cure, the pressure on Leo decreased. Days later, a simple flash of light in the room made Leo blink, a hesitant, almost imperceptible blink. But it was a start. The darkness began to dissipate, not all at once, like a magical miracle that the stone seemed to promise, but as a slow, gradual process, fueled by renewed hope, dedicated therapy, and above all by the deep connection that re-established itself between father and son. Arthur finally understood that the vision Leo needed was not just that of his eyes, but the vision of a father who loved him unconditionally, who had learned to see beyond the tangible, beyond fortunes, and to value what was truly essential. The stone, which was once an object of blind faith, of an almost magical promise, became the symbol of faith in truth, justice, and unconditional love, which, after all, were the true miracles. Arthur, who in his initial pride doubted any kindness that could not be bought, who feared fragility and loss of control, now understood that the deepest solutions were not in exorbitant figures, but in the simplest things, in small gestures of humanity. The human connection, the bond he had so longed for, finally materialized, showing that the deepest answers often reside in the simplest gestures, in the courage to see beyond what the eyes show, and in the strength of a heart that opens to another. If this story resonated with you, if it made you see the power of truth, compassion, and the transformation that comes from within, subscribe to the channel now, leave your comment and your like. Tell us where you're watching from so I can recognize you in the next chapters. Thank you for staying until the end and supporting our channel. Eyes of Faith.